at least primary. Well, there's ecological succession right there. There's a major glare. Well, good luck, Paige. Yeah, no, I like this one. So I'm good right now. But the predictable replacement of one group of species by another group of species over time. So that's, I mean, that is the general definition, but that doesn't help you understand what it means. So primary succession, it's important to understand, starts with no soil. So can we think of somewhere that would have no soil?
Ocean.
Desert.
That's water, that's aquatic, so land, think land.
Desert.
City.
There's soil there.
Yes.
You could dig into the ground and get dirt.
City is under the dirt.
Just wrong.
Rocks! Yes, that's the most common place this happens, is on rocks. Where else?
Antarctica. Ice cap.
There's soil there too. Keep digging far enough.
Arctic. We just said that. We just said
That so if those that's you're right. Ice isn't soil. It's hard for succession to take place there though, because succession has to deal with
Well,
plants growing.
under the rocks there's soil.
Right.
So
Right.
when
You're right. So I'm trying to explain the difference. So living. How come there's no plants at the poles? Right. So this can't happen there because of the temperature. But you guys are right. There's no soil exposed. Rocks is the biggest one that we're going to start talking about. Think more of an urban setting.
Pavement.
Pavement. Abandoned parking lot. Okay. So have you ever seen an abandoned parking lot? Is there anything growing in it?
yes,
Plants.
in the cracks of
What's growing?
plants.
Weeds. Maybe some grasses. Right. Okay. That's the start of succession. If that parking lot is left undisturbed, now the time frame varies. Oh, actually, just occurred to me. I Am Legend. Anyone ever see that movie?
Yeah.
It's older at this point. Will Smith. There's like everybody dies off. And if you've seen the movie, that's succession. Earth is taking over New York City. So if you leave that parking lot undisturbed, nature will overtake that area. That's called primary succession. And here's an image of it. Here. So you got exposed rocks, and then gradually over time, and this could take hundreds of years, you got lichens, mosses, algae. Those types of plants will grow right on the rocks. That takes a while. The next stage, you have maybe wildflowers and then grasses. The next stage, you have shrubs, small trees, young trees. It says aspen, cherry, young pine forest. And then eventually, you'll get broadleaf forest, beech, and maple. Now this picture is perfect because it's where we live. Okay, maple would be the northeast. All right, beech trees. We got oak. So this is kind of the northeast succession here, and I think it even says that the New England. They say New England. Yeah.
But like on a parking lot,
Yeah.
they grow through the cracks where the soil, like there's soil underneath the cracks.
Right.
So when like a desert, where the soil is much farther down.
So the definition of this is there's no soil.
Yeah.
So in a
the
parking
soil
lot there
underneath.
is no soil. Right?
Or
If it's
right
a
under it.
sure.
It's under the pavement, that's where the grass is.
Right, so
Yeah.
these rocks are, under the rocks are soil. But the succession doesn't start below it, it starts on the rocks. I know what you're saying.
Oh, so
in
then
a
the
crack,
parking lot thing
Yeah.
is done because they grow through the
but
cracks.
it's an example of where succession can occur. It's going from just pavement, and you can actually have a forest eventually over time if no one disturbs it. So I see what you're saying, because there's cracks and there's grasses and there's weeds or whatever. But the point is okay, let's say you have moss, lichen, something growing right on the pavement. That could happen.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, I mean
Okay.
you're kind of
For what
splitting
you're-
hairs here.
for what you're
The
going.
point is, the definition of this is that you cannot start in the dirt. It has to be something that is basically impenetrable, like a rock or pavement. So typically, rocks is where we see this, or area that there's a lot of rocks, not a lot of soil, and it says that areas devoid of soil. Here, actually, I want to tell you this. So I have rocks, I have a parking lot. Oh, one more here. You guys like to talk about these things.
Basketball.
Volcanoes.
Oh.
What happens after volcanoes?
Oh, like the lava's like fertile.
Yeah.
The lava is cool and it's basically rock, but then succession can take over. So cooled lava as well. So here's what I have. The algae, lichens, and moss grow on rocks. And I want you to write this down. So these mosses and algae and lichens, they secrete this acid, and it kind of eats away at the rock so that these organisms, these plants, can absorb nutrients directly from the rock. That's pretty interesting. I did not know that until I looked into this.
Plants are growing out of rocks.
Literally out of rocks.
So if I get picked up a rock.
Yes, there would be like moss on it, yeah. Like a rock with moss on
I'm
it.
thinking like a tree.
Well, no, because it takes time to get the tree. The rock's going to be gone by then.
How would where's the rock go?
I'm telling you, I'm explaining it. So the lichens, mosses secrete acid that help obtain nutrients from the rock, as well as increasing erosion of the rock. So the mosses and the lichens, they secrete an acid that erodes the rock. They can absorb nutrients from the rock, and then the lichens and the mosses start to increase their population. That's the first step of. That's the most important part. You go from rock to having some green stuff, and they have special adaptations. They secrete this acid to help erode and get nutrients out of the rock.
They literally use what the rock is made of.
Yep. Yep.
This was-
Then as these species die, what happens? So all the mosses and lichens, they're alive, then they die, they're alive, and then they die, and then what happens? When they die. They decompose, and now there's organic nutrients, right? So then what can move in? Slightly larger, more advanced plants, like wildflowers and grasses. So when the mosses and lichens start to do a good job secreting the acid, breaking down the rock, they grow, then they die. Now there's organic material broken down available for other species to slowly creep in, and those are wildflowers and grasses. So you guys need to know the progression, right? So you start with the simple mosses, lichens, algae. They do their thing. Then the wildflowers and grasses use the decomposed organic matter from the dying mosses, lichens, algae, and they start to grow. They mix with the rock, so they're called mid-successional species. So from the flowers to like shrubs, those are like the mid-succession species. As the flowers and grasses live and die, the soil becomes even more fertile, and then even larger, like the woody vegetation, like shrubs and small trees can move in, because now you're going from, again, rock, which isn't very easily accessible for nutrients, and it's eventually worn down, and all of the organic matter that has died and decayed is now made the soil fairly fertile for these larger plants. Becomes rich enough for larger, deeper root species to grow. And then what happens is, yes, there's grasses, but the shrubs will start to outcompete them because they're bigger and they block essentially the sun. They take the sun and the nutrients with their stronger, deeper roots, so the grasses die out. And then the same thing continues to happen. Then you have larger trees, they overpower the shrubs, then even bigger trees, and then you eventually will have, you leave it for hundreds of years, a mature forest. So that's what I wrote here. So why do we end up with mature forests in New England? Make sure you write this down. It's because we get a decent amount of rain. This primary succession in the southwest part of our country are not going to create mature forests. They might stop at the shrubs. They just don't get enough water to get into these larger trees. Not on a regular basis. So here's what I wrote. Yeah, that's what I wrote. Southwest shrubs, Midwest, they end in grass. The big plains of our country, they stop mid-succession. They don't get enough nutrients and water to continue to grow. So we learned about the biomes. This helps explains a little bit like why are different areas, why they have different type of vegetation. The succession can only go so far depending on nutrients in the soil and precipitation. That's the AP stuff, right? They're gonna ask questions about that, right? Why would some areas stop at shrubs, but some, the Northeast, New England can get up to trees? It's the nutrients and the amount of precipitation, which again is why you have shrublands and woodlands versus the plains and the grasslands, and then you have deciduous forests. So it's all connected. One thing I did write that I want you to write down. There aren't at the end of succession, there is not, underline not, necessarily more species or biodiversity. Not necessarily. More species diversity, I should probably finish it with that. Can you guys tell me why? Because it seems like as we're going, we're like, oh, more productivity, it's getting better, this is better. Not necessarily. Why?
Each species is dying out, suppose.
So, okay, yeah, we got, these are dying out. So now think about the end here.
They're just bigger than the first species.
They're bigger, and what maybe the maples have an advantage?
They're taller, they can reach the sunlight.
Maybe they're not taller.
Bigger root systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ponderosa pine, Douglas fir. We talked about that yesterday. The Douglas fir will push the ponderosa out. Why?
Douglas is shade tolerant.
Shade tolerant. Right. Wildfires will wipe them out. Ponderosa will come back. So at the end here, you may get all like one species of tree. Where back here you had 50 different types of flowers.
But there's still more species diversity
Yeah,
when
it
there's
starts
just
with
rocks.
rocks. Like, there's still more than when there's just rocks.
What I'm saying there is, as you are progressing, it doesn't mean you always have more species
They're
than
not like
at
stars
any
from
given
very
point.
much.
Right? No, yeah. Obviously, rocks. There's none.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So don't tell you, that's not like a beginning end. I mean, through the process, you might not always make more. Just because of competition, adaptations, it might not work out that way. All right. So you might have the younger trees. There might be a more evenness to it than the mature trees because some dominate. So that's all I'm trying to explain. That was something that in the curriculum made a point. Kids, they said students might get confused about that essentially. All right. Doesn't mean that like this isn't always a better scenario. All right, because of the competition and the conditions, whatever happens. All right, secondary succession, really quick. Let's just start it. All right, this starts with soil. Secondary succession, the succession of plant life that occurs in areas that have been disturbed but not lost their soil. Hurricane comes in, wipes out all the trees. All the trees get knocked down, you still have soil. That forest will come back. That will come back. It can't even be man-made, right? We could deforestation. You leave it alone, it will come back. That's what secondary succession says.
So parking lot.
No, parking lot doesn't have soil. Primary has no soil. Rocks, pavement. Secondary, you have to have soil.
Like on the surface.
Yeah, you reach down and put your hand on the ground, you're touching soil. Okay. Yes, on the surface.
So I'm guessing deserts just can't have succession.
So deserts don't do a very good job with it, and why would that be?
It's just covered in sand.
It's covered in sand, and there's really not a lot of organic matter, not a lot of water. There is water deep. There's deep aquifers, but not a lot for the plants. And they have those rainy seasons too, so you have a little bit, but deserts are usually very sparse, like their vegetation. It doesn't look anything like this at all. But some areas do get a little more rain, and they do get to the shrubby type vegetation. So primary, think rocks. Secondary, starts on soil. I guess that's it.